Lovely. Well, welcome today to the fabulous launch of David Evans' book. And it's such a pleasure to be here with you all on such a wonderful day. Been a long time coming, and lots of excitement to come. So, I'd like to introduce the Reverend Lynn Arnold. So, as South Australians, you'll know him from his days in Parliament and as a previous Premier of South Australia. You may also know him from his work with World Vision, Anglicare SA, St Peter's Cathedral, or as the sparkling host of Sunday Night with Lynn Arnold on Radio 1079 that I listened to yesterday in preparation for this.
Okay.
Lovely. In our family, we actually know him from his years as a Quaker, a member of the Society of Friends, before he returned to his Anglican roots and chose to become a priest. Throughout his life, I think you would say that Lynn has displayed a strong thread for social justice and service to community. He's therefore a perfect person to reflect on David's book and the message it conveys. Please welcome Reverend Lynn Arnold.
Thank you very much, Susan, for that very warm introduction. And yes, your parents and I go back a long way. We go back to the late 1960s when Topsy and David were in Tasmania, but we would meet at yearly meeting in Adelaide or Canberra or wherever the yearly meeting it would take place. And I knew then what a dedication both Topsy and David had to that fundamental core Quaker belief of actually believing that your kingdom come is something that we are all called to be a part of. The bringing of God's peace to the world, and accepting that there is a responsibility to be part of that process of bringing social change for the betterment of people. And I say all that because I think that all of this powerful little book is really part of that proud tradition that Quakers can lay claim to. It's a powerful little book because it has much more in it than the simple number of pages might suggest. It is, of course, itself the outcome, the distillation, I guess you might say, of thesis work that David has done, his Romeo and Juliet style, a study in qualitative research 1993 to 2013. And that then, his supervisor apparently said, what you have here is really a book. And so David then chose to work on that. I found the topic interesting in terms of this Romeo and Juliet style. The idea of love problems is something that has always engaged humanity, I guess, from time immemorial. We know of love stories and the difficulties that love stories have presented. I can remember when I first came to Adelaide, there used to be a late night show on Friday night on television, Nostalgia Theatre. And what struck me at the time was how many of these movies from the early 1930s were based upon the difficulties of true love finding a home, where the male and the female would fall in love with each other, but there would be some imponderable thing that was seeking to prevent it happening. And it would bring near crisis, but in the end, in the way of Hollywood of the 1930s, near crisis could not be allowed to resolve itself in absolute disaster. It had to resolve itself in happy ever after. But David has taken us to the forefront of the fact that that is not as simple as life is, and very often near crisis or crisis does not take us to happy ever after. It takes us to another place that forces us to examine what we mean by the relationship with love, what we mean by the relationship with society, the society in which we live, the clan or the community in which we live, and to deal with all the issues that become involved in that. He has taken the issue of Romeo and Juliet as the starting point of this, and Romeo and Juliet, as the play by Shakespeare, was itself based upon an earlier work in English, which itself was based upon an earlier work in Italian, but all of which dealt with the fact that there was very real reason why the clans, the Montagues and the Capulets, as Shakespeare chose to call them, had their justification, I'm tempted to put that word in inverted commas, the justification for the difficulties they had with the other. And here we have a young couple who break their way through the definition of the other, who break their way through the justification for having the other. And that really reflects what so often happens in love stories in our society. And it begs the question, what is love? The title of the book tells us you're not only going to be asked to consider what is love, you're going to be asked to consider what is honour. Remember, we refer to this term honour killings because some deep wound has been done to honour in the name of love, and honour transcends that. Very tragically, we have at this time in Adelaide a case that is forcing this issue into our own society, very much making us confront the fact that it is not just something that happens over there, it's something that has actually happened and attempted to happen in our own community. So this issue of love and honour, this tension, the Bible itself talks about honour thy father and thy mother, but it also talks about when two become one. You leave your father and your mother. And we are forced into this situation. How does one keep this balance, this profound balance between these two issues? It failed in the case of Romeo and Juliet. And in the various case studies that David has put in here, it doesn't fail in all of them, but it fails in a number of them, and it fails quite dramatically. And he poses the question in dealing with that, how could it have been different? What were the issues that needed to happen to ensure that the outcome could have been different from that? Towards the end of the book, David toyed with the fact that I actually wondered, he said, whether I should not have been talking about love and honour, but love and shame. And indeed, what is the very issue when one is finding one's honour offended is that one is feeling shamed in the process. Now, honour itself is a complex word. It's a word that immediately invites itself to have dignity about it, that immediately invites itself to have importance about it. I'm glad, Susan, you did not introduce me with actually what is my proper title, Lynn Morris Ferguson Arnold. I was bequeathed that title by the governor at the time after I left politics, and it's a lifelong title I hold. But it strikes me as very odd. Why should that title be bequeathed on any human being? What is it saying about one human being different from another? But that actually speaks to the issue of what we have in society. We have a very human interpretation of what it is to have honour. And we have developed that human interpretation over millennia. And very often it is a toxic interpretation. We know that we seek to give the stamp of some approval to things. I have a great historical interest in something called the East India Company, having had a relative who was working for them and died for them, in fact. The official title of the East India Company is the Honourable East India Company. Well, I invite you to read some of the works about colonial India, Amitabh Ghosh in particular, and you'll discover that what a defamation of the word honour is the Honourable East India Company. The mafia is often referred to as the Honourable Society. Why? Because they see themselves as proclaiming a defence of some clan, of some community. So, hence the word honour and the questioning that we need to do. But love, where do we go with the word love? Can we have something that, and there's been so much written about the word love over centuries, where do we find love ranking? Does love trump other things in society? Well, David explores the balance of that between the tensions of a society wanting to hold itself together, want to use the Capulets and the various families that are represented in here, had various reasons for trying to defend their well-being in society. But love worked its way in. I actually think that we're in the Christmas season, and so we're coming to the birth of Christ as the season which we celebrate. God made human, that miraculous situation where it takes us to a whole new level. God initially created humanity in his image, and then he creates himself in humanity's image by the birth of his son. But which was an immense showing of love for us in society. What a massive showing of love by the divine love of God showing to us. But how did that end up? It ended up by shame. The crucifixion was the most shameful event that could have happened. Only the most shamed in society were crucified. And so the proof of the love in this situation actually took shaming to prove its power. So that's why I'm wondering whether David, in the end of his book, talks about the fact whether shame is really the concept he's wanting to struggle with. I mentioned at the outset, of course, that Topsy and David have a long Quaker tradition, and they felt impelled by the Quaker call to bringing a ministry of reconciliation. This idea that one doesn't just leave the world to its own devices, but actually wants to play a positive role. And so this book challenges us very much in that regard. You read the stories, and as I say, some of them have the crisis ending not happy ever after, but in disaster. There is the one, Aotearoa, which I found very hopeful to finish the book on, Hinamoa and Tūtanakai. I actually first heard the story of Hinamoa and Tūtanakai in Tapuia, which gets referred to in this particular chapter. I was staying in Tapuia at the time with an old Maori woman, and she told me these legends that take place. But David then has the end chapter, and this is the distillation of a thesis. And so if you read this end chapter, it is not long, but it is incredibly powerful in terms of the way in which it challenges you to examine what needs to be done. Each individual chapter has had a structure to it, but the end of it is the stepping stones that might have been needed to take that story to a better outcome. What is a stepping stone? A stepping stone is something crossing a gap. It's not a path which is continuous. It's moving from one place to another and having, by some means of faith, to journey across a gap. Now, if you live in we all live in society, and we all find ourselves in comfort zones within those societies, and it's very difficult to step out of those. Here are stories of cultural interaction that required holding one's breath and taking a step, a leap of faith to another point. That is not just the sort of thing one says, well, just do it. It actually requires a process of self-engagement and absorption. Of course, David is not shying away. He's not justifying cultural issues as something that they will move on. He believes they do need to be challenged, and that we do need to have respectfulness for individuals and not allow cultural traditions that can end in disaster of honour killings to just happen like that. But he also acknowledges that while the power of law is needed, the power of a justice system is needed, you also need to change the hearts of the person. There is I presume it's true, it may be apocryphal, that Quakers say, and I've often quoted it, about the speech or the conversation between George Fox and William Penn. And William Penn was brought up in a cultural milieu where you needed to be armed to defend yourself because that's the way the world worked. The honour of society required that that's the way the world worked. And yet here was this George Fox coming along and said, no, there is an alternative way. Well, William Penn couldn't easily make that journey. He was still carrying a sword. He came from a military family. And so he asked, what about this? I'm struggling to actually, putting words into his mouth, but it's essentially this is the gist of the conversation. What about this? How am I wrong? Should I just drop the sword? And George Fox made the comment, carry thou thy sword till thou no longer canst. In other words, you will have to come the journey yourself. And this book is about how that journey may be embarked upon and traversed by taking leaps of faith from one stone to another. So if you want to, as I say, read the whole book, but the pathway to peace at the end is a particularly powerful summary that I think is very, very thought-provoking indeed. I want to just read one paragraph from page 37. The way forward in relation to forbidden love is from preventive coercion, in other words, you do need preventive coercion in some situations, by family and or local authority and persecution if the relationship proceeds, well, you don't need that, to non-violence with estrangement, and so some of the stories show how they had to flee to escape, estrangement, breaking down of bonds, to reconciliation, to acceptance with reservations, to unreserved welcome and celebration. And he highlights one particular piece. You highlight, David, the opinion in Nepal, which I think as an ideal, and I think that's true, though I do find that Tutankhamun and Hinamara, in a broader context, also represent that same sort of outcome. So, and then he will finish the book with the steps to peace. And it seems to me the steps to peace that he highlights there, how do we view progress? Every culture has a wonderful, legendary, romantic stories. Every culture has its marital taboos, and so on and so on. And really a process of bringing us into understanding what can happen. It is such the opposite, and I should have brought the book with me, of another book I have, which is a study done by a bishop in Rwanda about the descent, effectively, into the hell of non-reconciliation. The whole process where the other becomes defined as non-human. And when the other becomes defined as non-human, then the other is capable of being eliminated. That, he wasn't defending that, he was just simply doing an analysis. That's what the pathology of otherness is, the opposite of what David is talking about in his process of what needs to happen. So, it's not a big book. Talking with David beforehand, he made the comment, it's available on audio, for example, it's available on the web. It actually has the benefit, by being a distillation of a much bigger set of study, of very quickly becoming a thought provoker. I would encourage it to be used, for example, not only for your own individual reading, but for study groups, to actually study, work your way through the issues that are being proposed there. Now, my job, I think, is to launch the book. The launch is a funny word with books. You do have some bubbly down there. One imagines, like with a ship, you take a bottle of bubbly and you smash it over the book. But that's not very good. It makes it soggy. So I much prefer not to launch books, but to declare them open.
Thank you so much, Lynn. That was beautiful. And so many ways of taking in all that knowledge from the book. Now, I spoke earlier about Lynn Arnold's roots, and I thought I'd talk a little bit about Topsy and David's roots. And I'm hoping I won't embarrass them too much, but I figured that everyone loves to hear a bit of a backstory. Some of you may not know that my own parents' marriage was not particularly welcome on either side. Topsy's parents were Anglican, and one could probably say rather snooty. Her father, Ralph, was a high school headmaster who adored his daughter, a rather late and unexpected addition to the family. Her mother, Dorothea, was a lady. She cooked, she arranged flowers, and she was particularly proud of how she served coffee, an unusual habit at the time that her husband Ralph had brought back from France following the war in World War I. Topsy was brought up by an Aboriginal maid called Black Susie, who put flour on her face to make her face whiter, did a lot of the bringing up of Topsy, I understand, and much to my grandmother's inconvenience, used to sometimes just head off on walkabout. David's parents were Baptists. His father ran the pharmacy between the two cinemas on Goodwood Road, and in the days when pharmacists made their own brews. He had a fantastic concoction called Baby Be Calm that was probably full of barbiturates but guaranteed a lovely night's sleep for everybody. He was also a devotee of Freud and wrote one of Australia's very first books on contraception. This one here, ancient tome, here currently in the Australian Library in Canberra. And it was realising that David, another late and unanticipated addition to the family, was on the way that prompted him to import dodgy books from Europe and provide risque psychological and contraceptive advice from his pharmacy in Goodwood Road. Much to my father's embarrassment, I understand. David's mother worked hard all her life, keeping the household together. From Topsy's parents' perspective, the only thing that could have been worse than a Baptist, oh my golly, would have been a bog-trotting Irish Catholic. Topsy and David waited 5 years to be married, at times only seeing each other when they were allowed on Sunday afternoon to play bridge with her parents, and have both adored and sometimes irritated each other, possibly each on the same day, often ever since. So maybe it was these early times that set the scene for Dad when he spied a newspaper clipping many years ago. But he's about to tell you all of that, so I won't steal his thunder. While we're not talking killings in our family, the difficulties that even my parents had in South Australia reminds us to be humble when we judge others and their beliefs, to do our best every day to approach others with love and kindness. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to introduce the man of the moment, the author, the academic, my father and all-round good guy, David Evans.
Well, thank you, Susan, and thank you, Lynn, and thank you, everybody, for coming. What to say? There's too much to say. But the moment of awareness happened in 1993, where I came across this clipping that made me think I just do not understand what's going on. And that led to writing a thesis. And there you can see my background material. It's been an exciting trip. What's over there? One of them is my thesis proposal, which was in a school where they published student seminars. So I'm very pleased to have that, 2006. And also there is an academic article from the paper I presented in Ahmedabad in India. And that was printed this year with the Springer big volume. So that is an academic approach. But I just want to emphasise a couple of things. If you can see the screen over there, that's where my first website comes up. And if you want an even shorter version, there's a 3-minute PhD. So you can get it all in 3 minutes if you like. But the book has been written to tempt you and it's been designed to be an easy read. One of the people who made comments in the front of the book is my old school friend, David Calder. And what he said was, I read it 3 times. And then he said, add to that, you weren't very good at English, were you? And now you write well. So seeing Tony Seymour there, I think it's after a lifetime of writing concise, accurate, factual pathology reports that might have led to this type of expression. It's been a very great fun adventure, and of course I have to thank all of my family for ideas. John Allison over there was the first to tell me about Hinamai and Tutankhamun, and that is the happy, Romeo and Juliet story. So you must read that one. My sister introduced me to a Thai senior bureaucrat. So I said to him, have you got any Romeo and Juliet stories in your culture? And he said, of course we have, but the West just doesn't know about it. And this is Little for Our Law, and there's a book about it over there. So it's a great expanse of material. It was deliberately limited to eloping couples. I didn't want to get into that horrible gender bias of just girls being killed for shaking hands or for holding hands. I wanted people who would die for each other. And that's what the stories are about. So thank you. Thank you for coming.
Okay, so just in summary, and because I think in his excitement he's forgotten to say, but in 1993, Dad saw a newspaper clipping where a father hung his son in their village in India in front of everybody because he was choosing to be with the young woman that he loved. And that spurred on the PhD because Dad just could not understand how a father would, in front of everybody, hang his own child. So, the book is definitely worth reading, and not because you'll be gloomy and stuff, but because it offers insights into cultures that we would never normally understand and see. And as he explained, there's lots of opportunities to get involved. So Love and Honour, which is the short one, Marriage for Peace, is published by Balboa Press, and that's the one we have here today. Lachlan over there has many copies. But there's a larger book, which is more of the thesis, and that's actually the one that's available free online from his website. So it's a bit of an inversion. You pay for the small one, or you get the big one for free. And the big one has heaps of romance, drama, and global peace philosophy. You can also have it in an audiobook. And there's the 3-minute PhD thesis, which is how you distill a PhD into a very short time to get it across to people in no time at all exactly what you're on about. And so, with that, I think there's drinks, and I'm sure Dad would love to sign any copies, talk to you about it, answer any questions. Thank you so much for coming, and once again, thank you to Lynn Arnold for being with us today.
Thank you.